Hello and welcome back to another episode of Bible Eyes, the show where I participate in the culture war so you don't have to. First up on my agenda for today, culture war issue, fellas and ladies and non-binary pals. First of all, I'm sorry that I did this, but I did go to Chick-fil-A yesterday, and I can't help but notice it's the Christmas season, and these sons of mothers don't have the word Christmas anywhere on their cups. It says, share the joy, instead of a positive message of love and light in Christmas time. I think this is, and my dog. I think this is a real travesty. We got to do something about it, folks. So here's what we're going to do. We are going to join the war on Christmas on the other side. If can't beat them, join them. Today we're going to be talking about the Christmas story again. There's just so much content in the Christmas story, so many wrong things in these just these two books that actually cover it. So let's dive into it. The question of the day is going to be, where in the world is Jesus Sandiego? The question of the day is going to be, where in the world was Jesus when the events of the Christmas story were happening? Because we have some extremely contradictory reports. So let's start with the simple one first. This comes out of the book of Luke, chapter 2. We're going to be reading out of the New Revised Standard Version, updated edition, as usual, except for Bible Gateway just seems really dedicated to the idea that I need to be using the NIV, which is patently silly. So sometimes I'll accidentally do that. So here in chapter Luke, Jeebus, I haven't had coffee this morning. Here in Luke chapter 2, we have a fairly simple, straightforward layout of the Christmas story. I've pulled a few things here. So it says, in those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration and was taken while Quirinius was governor of Syria. All went to their own towns to be registered. Now, first of all, I don't think this necessarily merits its own video, but this particular claim is just absolutely silly. We do not have any reason to think that the Romans would have required people to go to their ancestral homelands, back to the towns that their ancestors were from 28 generations prior, or if you count correctly, something like 32 if you actually add up all the generations that we're supposed to be talking about here. But that's a different video. Go watch my genealogies video if you want to hear that story. But the fact of the matter is that, there's no administrative reason for the Romans to have people do this weird traveling thing. And this is the whole pretense of Luke's story, is that we have to have him growing up in Nazareth. We have to have him being born in Bethlehem because we've made all these silly claims about prophecies about this man. So we got to reconcile the story somehow. So Luke basically just thinks back 60 years and is like, wasn't there was a census around that time? And what if we made it so that there was a census and that's why he had to go to Bethlehem? Well, that doesn't make any sense. Wait a second. He's from the line of David, so he had to go back to his hometown. That it's just not a thing that happens because the Romans are taking a census for taxation purposes. They want to know where people actually live. It doesn't make any sense for Joseph to be paying taxes in Bethlehem if he lives in Nazareth. That's quite far away, as we'll see in a little bit when I bust out the maps. So in Luke's gospel, they actually start out in the town of Nazareth. Luke 2 chapter 4 says, Joseph also went from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to the city of David called Bethlehem, because he was descended from the house and family of David. And so he goes down in Luke chapter 2. They have a baby there. The only thing that I skipped over is there's a little event with the shepherds that happens in Bethlehem. And then in Luke's account, whoopsies, that's not the right tab. In Luke's account, down in chapter 2, what happens is they leave from Bethlehem and they go to Jerusalem. Because in Leviticus chapter 12, we have a ritual purity thing that needs to happen. So after a woman gives birth, she's ritually unclean for an amount of time that depends on whether or not the baby is a boy or a girl, because God is super smart and knows that all people are created equally. And so if it's a girl, obviously that's dirtier. So you're going to, there's a different amount of time that you have to wait before you can go become ritually pure and rejoin the assembly of Israel. So she goes, the long story short is that in this case, we're talking about 33 days after she gives birth. In Luke's account, at that time, when the time came for their purification, according to the law of Moses, that's the Leviticus 12 I just read, they brought him to Jerusalem to present him from the Lord. The thing immediately before that, they're in Bethlehem, so we are to assume that they are to go from Bethlehem to Jerusalem, which is not that crazy, because Bethlehem is just right here. It's right here, and then Jerusalem is right here. We're talking about not a very long trip, something that you could probably walk in like a day. I think it's around 10 kilometers if I was looking right earlier. Zooming out a little bit, this is the actual map, just so you can get an idea. So Israel here, and Bethlehem and Jerusalem fairly close together. Now, Nazareth is up here. Nazareth is the starting point of Luke's journey, and then they traveled down here. This would have been, let's see, here's my Google Maps. Walking, it says it's 146 kilometers. It says it would take 35 hours of walking, but that is an insane breakneck pace, I would imagine. So you can imagine that a pregnant woman on a donkey, this would have been quite a considerable multi-day journey for them, if it were the case that any of it actually happened. It didn't, don't worry. So they took Jesus, after 30 days had passed, up to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. And then some stuff happens. There's like they meet some people at the temple that tell them about how great Jesus is and how he's going to change the world and stuff. And then at the end of the story, they leave. It says as soon as they had done what was required, they left and they went back to Galilee, to their hometown of Nazareth. So boom, boom, boom. That satisfies all the requirements, gets Jesus to Bethlehem, back to Nazareth. The trouble is that we have two different accounts of this story. So in Matthew's account, we have a lot more details because Matthew has a lot more lies to tell about Jesus along the way, and we'll cover most of them in a different video. But you get a lot of details because what Matthew's theological interest is he wants to prove to you that Jesus is fulfilling all of these prophecies. So just in this one short chapter, you get 1, 2, 3, and actually 4 references to like Old Testament prophecy that Matthew's trying to like check all the boxes for. So in Matthew's account, it doesn't exactly say where they were beforehand. So it just starts out and it just says, boom, Jesus is born in Bethlehem, right? Prior to that, you've got essentially just like genealogy stuff, and then a birth. Let's see. So it didn't say anything about location, about like where it was that Mary was when when the Holy Spirit came on her and got her pregnant. It doesn't say anything about where any of this happened with this little spat that she has with Joseph about whether or not she's actually a virgin, or whether or not she just got knocked up by some random guy in the town. So it starts out, boom, here we are in Bethlehem. Then it begins with the story about Herod, actually, of Herod wanting to track down and kill this baby Jesus because he doesn't want to be dethroned as the king of the Jews. So the wise men come, they hear about Jesus. Herod asks them where, he can look for this new Messiah? And they said, oh, it's going to be in Bethlehem of Judea. This part I really like. Again, probably make a whole video on this at this point. It's a little outside of the scope of this adventure, but it actually says that the wise men say this, in Bethlehem of Judea, because so it has been written by the prophet, and you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers, blah, blah. We'll do that whole prophecy later, but what I want you to think about right now is, like, these wise men are from the east. The east. They're from a faraway land. It makes no sense at all that they would have access to the Old Testament prophecies about the Messiah from the Jews, right? In, like, most Christian traditions, these people are from, like, the east, right? Like, from, like, China and stuff. I mean, I know we're all just making up the rules and it's all Calvin ball and none of it's real, but, like, it's crazy that this detail made it into the Bible, that these people allegedly are supposed to be, like, really up to speed on what the prophecies are of Yahweh, the storm god, who has a small insular community of followers in the Levant. It's just wild. Okay. The point is, though, that they're in Bethlehem, that Jesus is born in Bethlehem, that for some time after Jesus is born, he is still in Bethlehem. The wise men meet him in Bethlehem. They tell Herod that they're going to Bethlehem, and then afterwards, the wise men, they dip because they don't want to be part of the massacre of the infants. That's crazy. So they dip, and then Herod goes and just, like, waxes all the kids in Bethlehem. So it's a very Bethlehem-focused story, right? But in Matthew's gospel, instead of leaving from Bethlehem and going to Jerusalem and leaving from Jerusalem to go to Nazareth, which is explicitly the chain of events that happens in Luke's gospel, in Matthew's gospel, they go to Egypt instead, because Matthew feels compelled to rope in this random Old Testament verse, which we'll cover in another video, out of Egypt I have called my son. Matthew feels compelled to rope that in so that he can add it to the pile of evidence that Jesus is the Messiah, right? So he literally just makes up from whole cloth this whole thing about them going to Egypt so that he can, like, again, check his box, right? So it says, he was warned by the Holy Spirit. Joseph got up, took the child and his mother by night. They went to Egypt, and they remained there until the death of Herod, which I'll remind you happened in 4 BCE, before the Common Era. We've got external sources placing Herod's death at 4 BCE, which is, again, incredibly contradictory with the census of Quirinius narrative that we have in Luke, which happened fully a decade later. So they go to Egypt. That is a very long trip, fellas and ladies and non-binary pals, because we're talking about from Jerusalem. Okay, it was like a pretty long trip going to Nazareth, but from Jerusalem, we're talking about going way down here, right? And keep in mind that this is the same area that took the host of the Israelites 40 years to traverse this area. So it's not like you're just going to walk across it in a day, right? Regardless of how you want to spin it, it's too far of a drive to be able to jive with Luke's narrative, which is, I think there's some, again, I'm always thinking about, like, what is the sort of Christian apologist, like, automatic response to this? And I think somewhere in your brain right now, if you're a Christian and you're trying to figure out, like, how this works, you're sitting there like, well, maybe they went to Egypt and they came back to Bethlehem. Then they went and wait, no, that doesn't work, because they went to Jerusalem first and then they came back to Bethlehem and then they went to Egypt and then and they're moving around. But the problem is that the Bible is, like, really clear in plain English that it just goes, they go from point to point to point. They go from Nazareth to Bethlehem to Jerusalem to Nazareth. And in Matthew's gospel, they go from Bethlehem to Egypt. They wait multiple years, probably, I think most traditions would place it at between 1 and 4 years, although it's not really spelled out in the Bible, but it doesn't really matter because we're talking about such a long journey that I don't know. I would think we're talking about weeks, months worth of journey. So it's not trivial. It's not the kind of thing where just pop over to Egypt and pop back. And then further down in Luke's narrative, they wait around until Herod died. His son Archelaus takes over. And so when they come back, it actually specifically says that they don't go back to Bethlehem, right? Which is in contradiction to the apologist autonomic defense system that I just proposed earlier. Because in order for you to harmonize them, you have to be like Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Egypt, Bethlehem, Nazareth, right? But it specifically says that doesn't happen. So they wait around till Herod died. Then they realize that Herod's son is still in power, and so they're like, well, we want to stay way, way, way away from Bethlehem because they're like killing all the babies over there. So let's go instead to Nazareth. And so that's where they end up. And again, Matthew he can't help himself. I love the book of Matthew so much because he lies like he breathes. This is, again, a different topic for another video, but for some reason, Matthew feels compelled not just to be like, oh yeah, he came from Nazareth because that's where Jesus came from. Like to the extent that we know that there was a person named Jesus who came from Nazareth that these stories are all about. As far as we know, he just was from Nazareth. So there was no like additional detail needed. He could have just been from Nazareth. But Matthew can't help himself. He has to go find a little like breadcrumb of every single thing. And so he goes back to this Old Testament passage, finds this thing about him being called a Nazarene, which is actually a mistranslation of the whole thing. We'll do a whole video on it sometime. But the point is that all you have to do, fellas, ladies, non-binary pals, is get out a map, get out your Bible, and just try and figure out, like, what are the details? Because ultimately, if you're a Christian, you're watching this, you probably think that, like me, I'm a guy who's, like, set out to, like, destroy the Bible or, like, to rip people's beliefs out of them and prove to them that God is not real. The reality is that I was a Christian. And for me, and I know not everybody's like this. Not everybody like wants to learn stuff and like wants to be really set on the details, and so like people like some mystery in their lives. So I get it. Maybe it's just a me thing. But all of this came out of a place where I took the Bible very seriously. I took the gospel seriously. I took my faith very seriously. And because of that, I wanted to learn more. I wanted to figure out, like, what is it that this book is actually saying? I want to take the text seriously. And the problem is that when you do that, if you stop reading the Bible for explicitly personal meaning and just read it to try and, like, nail down a few of the details, just to not even just to check that they're accurate, but just to know more about it. Like if this Jesus really came and saved my sins, like I want to know his deal, we're talking about somebody that I'm supposed to be in a relationship with. And so when I go to try and learn about that and find this level of like lies and inconsistency, it feels a little bit like you check your partner's phone and find a bunch of texts flirting with their ex, right? It's like you trust the people, you love them, you want to like just bring you want to take the relationship seriously, and then you find out, wait a second, this whole thing is built on lies. And that's the experience that brought me to the place I am now, to essentially be making these silly videos. So man, I don't have like a conclusion to this. The point is, none of this stuff happened. So I hope you all have a wonderful Christmas. Thanks for watching if you do, and I love you. Bye.